This is the meeting of the Public Integrity Task Force, Mayor Cooper's Public Integrity Task Force. It's February 25. At our last meeting, we sort of had a general discussion, I would call it, about the form that our report would take. And I volunteered to create an outline of what might be included. Then what's reflected in what I emailed around today is really great input from Dean Koch with, I think, his notes, which really matched in large measure the notes that I had taken, but were presented in a helpful way. And so I tried to break that down just into an outline form that can shape what we may write as a report. I have no pride of authorship at all about what's on here, but we need a framework for what kind of report we're going to deliver. And we really need to get our report done by mid-March. We have one more meeting on March the 10th, I believe it is, back here at 3 o'clock on March the 10th. It's my hope that by that meeting we can have a draft that we can discuss and hopefully finalize or come close to finalizing, and then it can be finished shortly thereafter and delivered to the mayor's office by mid-March. So that's kind of where we are in the process. I'm happy to sort of try to walk us through what this structure is. And do any members of the committee have comments before we start walking through?
I haven't had a chance to read it. So.
Well, we're going to read it now.
Okay.
So you only got it today. So, I thought it would start by just sort of outlining and summarizing what we have done as a committee, who we've heard from, the help we've gotten from Metro Legal, the audit folks, the procurement folks, describing kind of what we've heard and the process that we went through. Nikki was helpful before we even started our meetings to send me a summary of the existing authorities that are out there, metro ordinances, state statutes, federal statutes to some extent. And so I don't think it'll be very hard to do number 2, which would summarize kind of the existing landscape that's out there. We can talk about whether to have an appendix, which would be kind of like a telephone book, actually. Particularly if you include procurement. It was already a telephone book when it was sent. So we can talk about whether to do things like that, what we might want to append. But I think it would be helpful if folks agree to provide a background of the existing landscape that we've learned about. So far, so good. Is that okay? So the third thing I thought would really hinge on the survey, and I don't think we've completely gotten all the results of the survey. We had a partial result last meeting, and I guess, Mary, that's in the works to get the final results of the survey.
One more the other day from the Convention of Visitors Bureau.
Okay, good.
The delay was just confusion.
Sure, it's a lot of departments.
How to interpret
Well,
some of the questions because it's just outside of their wheelhouse. Anyway, they were very reassured and promptly provided it.
Okay, that's great. Well, it was presented, the partial results that were presented to us last time, and I'm not sure, Audrey, if you saw them yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen them yet.
Okay.
I was trying to look for them on box.
Well,
I didn't see
I'm
them
not
on
sure
our
if they're
box
there,
site.
but we'll have, before we meet again, we'll have a more complete, I mean, that was a partial result in any event, but I thought it was presented in a very helpful format, incredibly helpful format, because Audra or someone in the mayor's office had digested for us Audra had done that, digested the results, and you could draw some preliminary conclusions. It's not complete.
Right.
So, but it seemed to me that we could kind of describe what we did there and what kind of results we got, and that probably is, I would think, something to append to our report. I mean, that's like a deliverable that I would think we would want to append to our report.
Did Audrey provide some kind of written summary or structure of
did.
the results? So could I get a copy of that, Nancy?
Yes,
Thank
I'm sorry you don't have one yet.
Update it and then send it to everybody.
That would be terrific, thank you.
And we had talked too about potentially looking at it, bifurcating the results of departments versus boards and commissions.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to help Audra if she would like that.
Oh, that's
Ron, you've already been so
Assistance,
helpful in getting it ready.
Employees versus board
Yeah,
members.
because I think we will probably see insights if you
Yeah.
split the two groups apart. Because right now it's all,
Right,
aggregated,
they're
yeah.
all together.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be really interesting for me to look at.
If that can get pushed out before the 10th,
It needs to be.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it might
I'll ask her
almost,
if she can get it to you maybe Monday.
that'd be great.
Monday,
Because that'll
by
give us some
Monday.
time to extract, think about it, figure out what conclusions we think it shows.
Yes.
and just the data that it shows. I mean, that X% of department heads maybe don't know about their ethics policy or things like that. That's helpful information. I mean, it's not meant to be critical of anybody. It's just data.
It reflects what's going on.
It reflects the landscape, right?
Right,
It
and
reflects.
how Metro can improve, which is why we're here.
That's the idea. That's the idea. That is the whole idea. That is the whole idea.
What I was hearing is people thought maybe they were in trouble because they didn't.
Oh,
yeah.
And they're not.
And
And
that's what I
they're-
was saying, like, no, like,
No
if
one's
the
in
answer
trouble.
is, I don't know, just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, I don't know is actually a very helpful answer in a lot of ways, because that sort of leads us to recommendations that we have.
And we tried to convey that in the email that accompanied
I
the
agree.
survey, but I get it. People probably,
I think there's-
when you read one thing, but you think maybe
Or am
another.
I the
so-
only one who's gonna write, I don't know?
Yeah,
Right, of
I have to
course.
say, no, you're not the only one.
yeah, no.
You know, we tell people in depositions, I don't know is a good answer sometimes, and it's the honest answer sometimes, and that's perfectly fine. So that led to what's in section 4 of the outline, and I'm open to input on maybe there are more of these things. But I know we've talked several times in all of our meetings about awareness. You know, are the appropriate people within the government aware of the various rules that are out there? And since they do, in fact, come from different sources, it's a little bit complex, maybe. So how we can, but I think it's a fact that there's not uniform awareness. I think that we can conclude as a fact. So then that leads to what about the training, and how is that done? Excuse me, and can that be done in a way across the government that creates more uniformity, that where there is in fact more training, more, and I think, Alec, as you have said, you know, folks doing it every year and then certifying that it's done, and as you have done in institutions that you've been involved in.
Well, I mean, I think what it does is it makes sure that the company or Metro government has conveyed the importance of understanding those principal guidelines that they expect their employees to follow, right?
Yes.
And it holds them accountable to a certain level of behavior.
Right.
And if you don't do that, then you don't really have a way of really judging somebody.
Right.
Because you never explain the importance and significance of why government needs to be transparent, above board, right? And also to be able to do the will of the larger group versus those of a select few.
That's right.
And that's the big issue, I think, that we have to overcome in all governments, not necessarily in Metro government, but all.
Right.
One thing to think about, and you all need to tell us what to do, but just as an option, I was just finishing up another executive order end of last week on training of employees and, you know, recommendations to those who are not covered for Nikki's first presentation.
Yes.
What I had to go through when I came to work here was a lot of videos.
Yes.
And they were excellent. And you have to watch the video and respond throughout the video.
So it's an interactive video.
It is, but it covers, sexual harassment and diversity and all these wonderful things. So it seems to me, if that's interesting to you, and it's easy so that you don't have to worry about departments implementing it in different ways,
It'd
I
be the
would
same.
think that's some element of uniformity that would also make it easy to implement. I don't know what that costs, but I would assume it's
I
not
think that's something worth
insubstantial.
mentioning,
Just
that
a
it could
thought.
be a way of doing it by,
I think that's kind of what we were hoping, because once you have a standard training video that you have approved, then that's the consistency that you have from across the board.
Yeah.
So, like I said, when we worked at IBM, when they had their policies on behavior and stuff like that, it was one policy for the United States, okay? Maybe a little bit different policy for someone in Germany or somewhere else, but there was one policy across the board for everyone in the United States, okay? And then they also had a second section if you were working abroad. They had some other issues that you had to address. So I think that that's what we want to do, is making sure that there's a consistency of message, okay, across the board. And therefore, when people react, I think typically the way we did it, you had to score at least 70% proficiency on the questions. You go back through it as many times as you take until you get to 70% proficiency. Then you move on. But that way, a lot of times you give examples of what is considered unethical behavior, and people can now realize, okay, this may have happened before, I didn't know it, but now I know.
and I think that point about examples is a good one, where it brings something concrete.
Yeah.
I'm putting,
To have those scenarios in there will be.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way
Yeah.
that they do. That's the way a lot of the training videos were, what went wrong in this scenario,
Yeah.
right? And then you kind of highlight that.
Well, actually, your recommendation B on the second page covers the consistent policies,
Right.
and recommendation C covers the training, although we can get more granular if we want to say video or whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of this, we ought to just be leaving to the administration to decide the
how to implement
most
it,
effective,
how to
cost-efficient way to
implement it
do
with
it.
Metro
We're
resources.
certainly not against doing video.
Oh, no, I mean, that would, in my mind, that would be a for example way to do it. I mean, as opposed to,
What Alex was describing is like the sexual harassment one.
Yes.
It, tells you what it should be and what it shouldn't be, and then they have examples.
right,
And it was
Yeah.
very clear,
right.
as it should be.
Yeah.
So I'm just going down the list. I think we knew from the preliminary survey, the more complete survey is, I think, going to bear this out, that across departments and agencies, there's not a uniform conflict of interest policy. And sometimes they're not even aware that they may not have a conflict of interest policy. So that's important data that, one would think should be uniform across the government.
Well, as Alex said, there could be circumstances where you'll have a one-size-fits-all policy for everybody, but then there may be certain departments and agencies, based on what they do, they're going to have additional.
Well, procurement, for example, has additional things that include national
more
standards.
specifically directed.
Right.
And legislation that applies to procurement, for example, that wouldn't necessarily apply to other areas. Training we've kind of talked about. This reporting and enforcement, I think we learned that a lot of enforcement and reporting is left up to department heads, which is not necessarily wrong per se, but it leads to, and the word I've heard now several times from different folks within the government is decentralized, that Metro government is very decentralized. Did you all hear that? And, that's fine, and maybe as a structure, we're not here to evaluate the structure of the government, but if it is decentralized, when it comes to these issues, I think we probably want more, a more consistent standard. And so that was important information to me to learn, that it may depend on department heads and how they choose to do it. And I think the government can provide guidelines for those department heads that would then be uniform across the government.
I think one of the issues I think that kind of came up is that you never, you never got any feedback on the resolution, what the issue was, how many occurred.
That's right.
And how it was addressed. And that's one of the things that you really need, I think, to be consistent, is to kind of see how it's addressed, whether it was, you know, smack on the wrist or whether or not someone was read the riot act. I mean, I think that you want to make sure you're fair to all the employees, right?
Right.
Consistently across the board.
And that sort of leads to something else that I think we've learned from different sources, but it includes Metro Audit, and that is there are very few instances of anything being reported at all currently. So that goes back to awareness and training, has to go back to awareness and training, which are our sort of themes, I think. It's not that we don't have things written down. Perhaps they're not perfect, but we have things in place. There's not very much awareness of them, and that's resulting in very few, a handful of complaints or reports being, not that we hope there's a lot of complaints, but that evidence to me suggests that it's not being noticed.
And I think one of the feedbacks too was that they have little time for follow-ups, right? When they
That's
make
right.
recommendations, that they very seldom have the time to follow up on recommendations to see that the department implement those recommendations.
That's right.
And so, you know, that's always going to be a challenge. The big thing that jumped out to me was how flat that budget was and the number of people
For
they
Metro
had
Audit, and
from
that's in here,
2009
yes.
to 2018. I mean, Metro government in that period of time has probably gained 35% more staff. The budget's probably gone up 50%, you know, probably from $1 billion back in 2009 to probably 2.3, 2.4. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Can I back up a little bit?
Yes,
Because I
Audrey.
wasn't here last
Yes,
week.
yes.
So when we're thinking about who's going to be reporting potential violations of policy, who do we think that's going to be reporting? Or who do we want to make it easier to facilitate that kind of reporting?
Employees and public.
Yeah.
Both, okay.
Both employees and public. That sort of leads to the whistleblower idea to some extent.
Okay.
At least in my mind, that's part of it. Part of it would still be department heads. You know, I think part of it would still be Metro Audit finding
Right.
irregularities. So I think it could come up in in my mind anyway, in a number of different ways. Those issues could rise to the surface, I would think. So whistleblower being
Yeah.
one, department heads being another,
And the
the public
public.
being another. All of those are, and then employees, that's whistleblowing.
Right,
So,
right. Okay, that's helpful for me.
yeah. So we want to be sure that those channels for doing that are open and obvious and easy to use, and that folks would have confidence using them. So that's a little bit later on in the recommendations. And then the last point about, under the concept of gaps, would be just not a lot of oversight, certainly not in a centralized way, of these issues. So I think those are all these are solid things that I think we've observed, that the evidence supports.
Right.
And that we can sort of say with confidence, we've talked to a lot of people, we've heard from a lot of folks, we've done a survey, we can conclude that these are things that exist.
Right.
Are folks comfortable so far with what we're doing and how we're going?
Yes.
There may be other gaps that folks have heard or put in their notes. I mean, I sort of come through my file. Bill had wonderful notes about these things, and I personally anyway felt solid about these that are identified on the draft outline so far. You all may think of other things that should go in here.
Do we need to specifically state the decentralization, or is that covered with the
Well, I thought
uniformity
that when
comment?
I thought maybe somewhere in here, this sort of, that we've learned, I was thinking about the existing authorities and policies section. These aren't written yet, but I think that theme, it's a reality. The decentralization is a reality. And since this is such an important topic and not really one that's really probably ought to be left up to individual departments, it seems to me. Maybe that's worth mentioning, either in the scope of work and background or
Well, we're not trying to offend anybody.
Not at all.
The fact of the matter is that the decentralization of these activities and programs is
Yeah.
probably what has led
yes.
to most of the gaps that we're talking about. So
I
I'd almost
think-
lead with that.
Well, I mean, maybe it's part of the background, right? That's what you're saying.
Well, no, I'm saying we're
of
finding,
what we-
that this is very decentralized, and
Yeah.
we have a consensus that decentralization has led to many of the gaps we're now going to tell you, bang, 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 bang,
I think
bang.
that's a good way to do it.
Right.
So that,
And then the other thing is
yeah, that's
that,
good.
You know, Nikki had provided a lot of documentation on policies and practices and standards, right?
Yeah.
You know, the question comes in is, how is that translated from paper to reality within the government, right?
Right.
That's, I think, is the biggest step. How do we go from what's documented and make sure that whatever that is that's updated and documented gets transferred on a routine basis within the government, and that the government is operating based on those practices, and that we're holding employees, officials, and board members accountable for their action. When there's no consequence for actions, people are going to do what they want. Okay? And so there's a power structure that develops within government. And when you become a powerful entity within an organization, who challenges you?
Yeah.
But if you provide a mechanism to allow people to challenge, what you say is right versus what documented is right, then I think everybody feels like they own a part of the government and they can make a difference. And I think that's where we're trying to get.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, that probably leads to what are we recommending? That's probably a good transition into what are we really recommending. And I think over the course of several meetings, and from the beginning, I mean, we've been charged with should there be an inspector general, whatever the title might be, in metropolitan government. And I think most folks maybe everybody on the task force is of a mind that would be a good thing. And that if it is, then that I think becomes our central recommendation, because that's a way to bring uniformity, consistency, to give more visibility to the importance of these principles. And so I just put that first as the first recommendation.
Is our recommendation for an inspector general that this office would only have responsibility for things relating to conflict of interest? Because, the places where I know where there's an inspector general, their scope of authority tends to be pretty broad to investigate any kind of wrongdoing that might be reported within a governmental structure. And that seems to me to go a little bit further afield than what we've been asked to do, except that we were asked about an inspector general.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if you all talked about that last time and what people's thinking is on it.
Well, we actually talked about, we don't just need an inspector general, we need an inspector general and staff.
Yes.
So it's not like you can give one person the job and say, have at it. And one of the things the concern is that the staff capability has to match the scope of the duties, or we end up putting that person in the same circumstance that the auditors are in right now, where they have so few resources they can't possibly do all they want to do.
Right.
So I think the idea was we start here, but we could certainly put in the recommendation that once operational, that other duties could be added to the inspector general, or the scope of that office's authority could be expanded. I think that the implicit idea was to start here, get this working, and then I think it'd be great to say once it's up and running,
Martha.
we can even cite to what other what other inspector general's authorities are and say you ought to move in that direction.
I pulled, I don't know, I sent job description of Inspector General to Audra, hopefully that she would be able to share it with the group. It was from Houston. In fact, I think I did some research. I think there are in about 25 Inspector Generals operating in large cities. Okay, Houston, Texas, San Diego, I can't remember the list. So I kind of scanned each one of them. But one of the things about the Houston, that it was in charge with investigating all conflict of interest, fraud, and all illegal activities associated with government, okay? And they were an independent body. In fact, what was unique about their thing is they were looking to move towards a elected position. I don't like that idea because I think that it's right now they have it based on a commission that's appointed through the mayor's office and the council. They name an inspector general, but that talked about the kind of duties and responsibilities they had oversight, and it gave them independence so that they could look at what happens within not only the mayor's office if something took place, but all other departments, because they were an independent body, and that they were put into position by a, I guess, Blue Ribbon committee of council members and the mayor's office. So that's something that I didn't know if she had a chance to pass out. But there are a number of them that are out there. Yeah, I submitted about a week ago and asked her if she could
Send it
forward
to me, I'll forward it
Okay.
around.
All right, I'll forward it to you.
I'll be glad to circulate it to the group.
But it wasn't really on how we structured, but it was really to focus on the duties and responsibilities that they had in government, right? And to have a discussion of whether or not it need to be that broad or whether or not we need to tailor it in, so.
When you said you looked at San Francisco, hadn't you?
Los Angeles, Mary had sent me,
Yeah.
Mary sent me Los
Yeah.
Several
Angeles
cities.
at the
Yeah.
very beginning of the
Yeah.
process.
Well, if there's several to look at, we could look at several.
Yeah,
From my perspective, given that our charge was conflict of interest and policies related to political contributions, political activities, I just get a little nervous about having our recommendation be a broad inspector general that has the authority to investigate any violations of law within the metro government, as opposed to saying an inspector general would be an appropriate person who you could task with being responsible for investigating complaints and other alleged wrongdoing with conflict of interest and the things we've been charged with.
I think that's a good
That's my only
point.
that's my only
That's a good
hesitation
point.
about the inspector
And
general.
I think our discussion at the last meeting was in that context, right?
Okay.
I think it was in that context. My notes don't make it as explicit as it probably should be, because we aren't reinventing government as a whole, is your
Right.
point. We're looking at a slice of it.
Well, and so maybe we're actually looking at the Inspector General investigating conflicts of interest that don't rise to the level of criminal activity, but certainly if there's a crime or perception of a
Yes.
crime, that person turns it over to the TBI.
Oh, I think so.
Who is the
Yes.
natural
I think that's right.
body
That's
to
an
investigate.
excellent point.
I think that's right.
well, yeah, and I think, and I don't know, I didn't go through all the detail. I just kind of looked at their scope, but I think that would be the right thing to do, because, you know, we if it's a criminal investigation, fraud, kickbacks, all that other stuff, then that should be turned over to law enforcement. But they should be able to gather enough information to say that, hey, this appears to me to be an issue that's more than violation of ethical conduct and conflict of interest, right? So,
But you know, there's a tactic we ought to keep in mind here, that the more like a law enforcement person this position sounds, the more difficult it is to sell it.
that's
And to
right.
get cooperation.
And I mean, it's going to create, you talk about our questionnaire creating nervousness. This is going to create, so the point I'm making is that sometimes it's better not to say everything you think. You know, if we recommend an inspector general, we don't need to necessarily discuss whether that inspector general would have the prerogative to turn over the results of his or her work to the DA, because there'll be nothing in it that will say he or she can't. So I think we need to be very limited on the can side and very quiet on the can't side, because inspector generals, if whoever the person is if they're worth their salt, they're going to know that they've got a DA, U.S. attorney, they've got all TBI, they've got all kinds of resources. So rather than just say, oh, and you can invite them in, just,
Yeah.
they're going to know that.
I mean,
One other thing, Bill,
Yes.
just,
No,
again,
thank
I'm
you.
mindful it's your meeting.
No, thank you, Mayor. It's
I'm
fine.
just thinking to Audra's point, it's interesting about, in other words, if you had a narrow scope, you do have, I saw at the end of your suggestions,
Yes.
you know, in a year, you'd come back, and if it turns out that it's not quite big enough, you know, it's not quite
Yeah.
adequate, the scope needs to be more encompassing, then I would think that would be a recommendation you could make in a year. I think it's harder to go the other way, to pare it down in a year.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's to Audrey's, but that is to your point.
That is,
Yeah.
Right
yeah.
now, we're describing an office that, at least for purposes of what we are focused on, is really looking at ethics, conflicts of interest, those things across government, and being charged with, I would think, creating the uniformity and training that we're recommending. I think that would all be housed in that office, I would think. And that's what we can say. Is that leading to some more thoughts? You
Well,
know?
an inspector general usually doesn't have anything to do with training. I mean,
Well-
so, you know, what you're describing is a conflict of interest office.
Yeah.
And that's something else we could recommend, except that we were asked to think about an inspector general's office. So
Yes.
I think that that's just a real, most people who are, if you go out and hire an inspector general, that person is going to say, what, I'm supposed to train? No, I don't do that.
I think
They're not training.
I think you're
The
right.
training
HR
would be something they would say, that's the training.
I said that, and I think I was mistaken.
They could say, I approve this training.
Yes.
I see that you have appropriately certified that all of your employees have completed the training, so they could do those kinds of, things.
Right.
Bringing uniformity to
Yes,
that process.
bringing uniformity.
Yes.
So, you know, the differences that I see between having something that you call an inspector general's office to be responsible for this, as opposed to a conflict of interest office, and that's partly why I asked about the complaints. If you have an inspector general's office, I think it's easier for the public to know where to go with their complaints
That's true.
and feel comfortable that their complaint is going to be handled appropriately, rather than if you have a conflict of interest office within the government. I think it's harder for the public to find it, and I think they have less confidence in it. So that's why I'm comfortable going
title-
with something that's called an
title-
inspector general's office. It gives more credibility.
It implies independence,
And it also, yes,
right? I mean, I
implies
think
more
that's-
independence.
Right.
What we're missing in the recommendations is really a general description of duties.
Yes.
Excellent.
That's
So I
Yes.
think it probably would be helpful to have that, and whatever that description ends up being, it ought to include an obligation to see that the policies and trainings being complied with, a
Right.
compliance oversight.
Right, and we can say that these are the duties we're recommending based on our scope of work, and then, you know, as.
It can be whatever folks want it to be.
Right, and then this mayor or another mayor could give that office whatever kind of additional scope is desired, and additional staff that's desired at some later time,
I think that sounds good.
or right away, depending on the mayor's inclination.
We just in these notes, we touched on some of these, but we did explicitly at our last meeting talk about the idea that it be an appointment by the mayor, confirmed by the council, having a set term, and being an office where the person could be removed for cause. Those were Bill's notes, they were in my notes as well, that Is that all consistent with what folks would think?
I know that's what we discussed.
It
I guess
is.
I have a kind of an issue with that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if it's a political appointment
Yeah,
and the person can be terminated by the mayor, I feel like
for cause, but
from a public perception, it may appear,
less independent.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know when I was in Iraq, we
Yeah.
worked with a ministry, and the minister appointed the IG.
Yeah,
And shockingly, no corruption was ever
Found.
ferreted out by the IG. And I think we were all like, duh.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid
Yeah.
the same, at least perception, if not reality, might happen, particularly if we get a mayor that isn't as cognizant of these issues as our current mayor.
Well, I mean, the other option is, you got 40 elected members of the city council, right, that would be charged with providing that. That provides, the council and the mayor, even though Nashville has a strong mayor environment, council still provides a balancing act to that. So, one of the questions comes in is that an appointment that's made through the Metro Council, through discussion, right? Or how is it made? So that's the question I had, because I didn't like it to be a mayor appointment, because we could have a mayor that decides that they want to reward all of their friends, and professional services opportunities is a way of doing it, right? So, and that's typically the mechanism that most mayors use to reward their friends. So I'm not one that really allows the mayor to have that much input into it. I see more of a council being able to take that responsibility and be held responsible as a counterbalance to a mayor's office.
I think you run into the separation of powers issue there. And the other technical problem you get into is that if you're going to have a council that's either completely or jointly appointed by the council and the mayor, if you're setting up some oversight group of citizens who are going to oversee this, like Houston, then you're going to have to go to the council and have an ordinance passed to set it up. I don't think you can create that by executive order. The council
Right.
certainly is not going to want to be dictated to by executive order. And I see us throwing this in the middle of the political briar patch. And, I don't disagree that corrupt people will do corrupt things. Matter of fact, what I'd say is that we could write something that would get an A on our report card, and if somebody corrupt is at the top of it, they'll corrupt it anyway.
Right.
So for the sake of expediency, I'm saying this is not perfect,
It's a start.
but it's serviceable, and it's operated on the assumption that we're not going to have a corrupt mayor.
What about a hybrid, sort of like how the TBI director is selected, which is a group of legislators select people on a committee. People can apply for the job. The committee vets them, sends 3 nominees to the governor. The governor then selects one of these.
I've served
and
on
it's
that committee. You'll have to have an ordinance passed to set it up.
And it's on a staggered term.
You'll have to get an ordinance passed to do it. I mean, sure, that's fine.
But
It's
why would the
just-
Metro Council oppose something like that, which actually gives them some oversight as opposed to no oversight, which is what a completely political appointment would?
What you'll start doing is getting some high political trading on who the person's going to be. I mean that could also work. It's just I think you're going to find more process to that. I mean, we could recommend both if you want.
We could say there are different ways of doing it. There are different
For
ways
example?
of selecting an inspector general. The whole concept is new to Nashville, right? So just having the office is, I know we have a consensus, that's a good thing. Having the office is a good thing. And there are different ways to do it, and I don't feel like I'm an expert in what's the best way to do it.
See, actually, the legislature's been going through essentially the same discussion on the appointment of judges.
Well, it's been on judges for as long as I can remember.
And what they finally came to after all the travail for the last 40 years, what they finally decided they liked was let the governor appoint, we'll confirm. And that's what we've got here. Let the mayor appoint, and we'll confirm. So, I mean, there's no one right way to do it, and we can recommend some
We can
options.
say that there are different ways of doing it,
But we have
perhaps,
to say
and
the
leave it. I
bottom
mean,
line is. that
we
we're
are only
trying to-
recommenders, we are not
but
implementers.
What we think is independence.
Independence is
also-
important. I would agree with that. I agree with that principle.
Well, I think the thing I like about the process of selecting the TBI director is that anyone can apply and everyone knows who the applicants are. So if the person who is selected is clearly not the best person, it's very transparent. Everybody can see this person was selected, these 5 who have the requisite experience were not. I mean, I think there's a benefit to having somebody have to look at the applicants and
Yeah.
say yes or no, rather than it just being, well, I'm going to appoint this person because I like them or whatever.
Same thing, I mean, I'm the head of the chair that gives the governor recommendations for judges. And so we give him 3 candidates. Of course, part of the compromise was if he doesn't like those 3,
He can ask for 3
he
new
can
ones.
ask for 3 more. And if he doesn't like those 3, then he can appoint anyone he wants.
Right, but anybody can apply for that.
Sure.
Yeah. What I'm taking away from this is that our report needs to, we're going to recommend this office. The actual way that that person is selected is, we have some,
Well, let me ask you this, can we just make a recommendation and then highlight the key points that that office needs to have?
Yes, I agree.
Independence, okay, independence, support for, total independence.
Adequate staff.
Adequate staff. I mean, I think that if we put that in there, maybe let the mayor and the council work that out. So that
How
they can,
they're going to do it.
but we need to state the key principles of the Inspector General for Metro government and identify the 4 key criteria, okay, that must be in place to support that position, right? So, I mean, I don't know if because I think we're gonna probably have 3 or 4 different ways of trying to implement that. And if we can just state what we think are the binding principles for that position,
Yeah.
the independence of the office, the ability to pursue cases against any governmental official,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Regardless, I think if we can state those 4 or 5 things, let them work it out. I mean, I think they may make better progress than we can if we offer a possible solution.
Audrey?
But that begs a question of what do we mean by independence? So when you say independence, Alex, what do you mean? That the IG would have to be independent?
Independent of influence from direct influence from council, and influence from direct influence from the mayor's office.
So, so after the mayor, so that means at least only removal for cause.
That was in my
Right.
notes.
I'm just
And a
trying-
set term, and a set term.
I'm thinking out
as
loud,
opposed
set
to-
term.
No, it was actually a term that's going to be out of sync with the mayor's term, just like the FBI director.
Okay, I didn't read that,
Yeah, well,
okay.
that's-
Well, it's not,
Excellent.
Not in there.
it's not in what I typed.
Fabulous, okay.
Is it mayor's term 4 years?
4 years.
That,
So it could
Yeah,
be at
4.
at the
Every
year 2
other,
or-
every
yeah,
second.
Yeah.
So the
Well,
things
that
we talked
takes-
about, we're
that-
trying to
that
get at independence,
helps.
but also something that could
like
be
the FBI
implemented
director.
quickly, easily, something that this is a recommendation to this mayor.
Right.
I mean, that's what we're doing, and we're bringing something new. Not that it couldn't be
Right.
reinvented or modified over time, but it's only a recommendation and it's new.
Yeah, okay,
So
okay.
I think the idea that it have adequate staff, describing the kind of authority that we think, I think we've kind of talked about that, the issues that we've identified, and essentially centralizing. Now, Nikki, this was a question I had for you. I don't know whether it could have oversight, whether this new office could have oversight over other portions of metro government like NES or the schools or.
Not the schools. If any, it'll be very limited because they have, the authorities have broad power under
That's what
state
I
law.
thought. I put in my notes,
Yeah.
charter provisions. I didn't, I assumed there was already a lot of separation there. And so that's just something to, whether it could do that, whether it could, how far that could go, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's a legal question.
Yeah, it's pretty limited because really under state law, Metro can adopt ethical standards,
Yes,
but just as ethical standards is defined under state law, which is
Right.
pretty narrow
right,
for authorities. And
Right.
but other than that, the authorities are pretty independent and
Yeah.
have broad powers under state law.
yeah,
So Metro, even by charter amendment, will not be able to get into the business of authorities that much.
yeah.
Yeah.
Would those authorities have the choice, if they wanted to subject themselves to oversight?
Yeah, they could.
They could choose that. And it would be limited. And somebody may stop me if I'm asking questions that we don't want to
Sure.
discuss, but
Yeah.
it seems like they could choose. So when this is kind of rolled out and we're saying we want uniformity as much as we can have, and we want standards that apply as far across the board as we can have them and have them be consistent. Those agencies, those parts of government that are independent could choose to do something similar.
Yeah, adopt something similar.
They could choose to do that if they wanted to, right?
Well, the verb we can use is should rather than shall.
Should adopt something, but right, we can't force them to adopt
But see,
something.
the thing is, right now, these independent agencies are subject to oversight by the district attorney, right?
Yes.
Correct.
TBI, FBI, police. So I'm not so sure that they can either voluntarily opt in or create their own, or if an entity's created, whether it's by ordinance or statute
Yeah.
or executive order, I think it may be an open question about whether they can, if the Inspector General calls and says, I got a complaint about what you're doing, and they say, stick it in your ear.
You don't have authority over
Yeah.
us, right? I mean, that could be.
Yeah.
I'm
And
not so sure they're going to do that.
perhaps I'm opening a Pandora's box by just even getting into this question of how far we know that this new office, if it's created, could have reach over most metro agencies and boards, right?
Yes,
That-
those that are not independent.
Those that are not independent.
I think
And
what
we've
we can certainly say is that these independent agencies should either create a similar officer or voluntarily include themselves within the
Yeah.
Inspector General's position.
Yeah.
See, the other thing is that we're not telling the mayor how to do this, but you could march up to the Capitol and find yourselves a senator and a member of the House of Representatives and pass a state law that requires that inspector generals appointed by cities have this authority. I mean, you can,
suppose you could.
you can take care of these independent agencies around here real quickly by running around them and getting a state law. Now, that
Well,
may
I
not
don't have a
make
lot of
people
evidence.
happy, but-
I haven't heard a lot of evidence that that's even where the problems are. It's just that, in what we've been able to look at over 3 months, I think we do know that there is that independence and separateness. And so, our goal is uniformity, and so that's why I asked the question.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna say when it's that much money to be spent anywhere, okay,
Yeah.
it begs to ask the question. Okay, and I know if I look at the next biggest budget after Metro government, I have to say it's Metro schools.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, I know some of the people over there, and I know people that worked here went over there, and I saw a lot of press clippings about some of the things that happened with procurement over there, all right? That was just in the news 6 to 9 months ago, all right?
Right.
So I'm just saying that anytime you have the budgets that these agencies have, I mean, where does the oversight come from?
Yeah, the standards of conduct do not apply to metro schools. Yeah, under state law, they have the authority to adopt their own standards. So Metro's ethical standards do not apply to them.
I agree.
Yeah, so they're pretty independent in that aspect.
Yeah.
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 But they have their own auditors, don't they?
Yes.
And what is the...
I mean, their own in-house people
Right.
that do their own stuff.
And presumably, does state law require them to adopt any sort of ethical standards of their own? or-
Yes, they adopt their own. They're just not. They have independent authority to adopt their own standards. They are not bound by the standards adopted
So
by
that's
the
the lay
Metro
of the
Council.
land.
Yeah.
That's,
At the very beginning, when the law was first enacted, they were under Metros, but then it was amended to give them their own independent authority, the school districts, to adopt their own ethical standards.
So that their standards is rolled out through the board, right?
Board of Education, yeah.
Right? So the Board of Education is responsible for setting that, but I don't know of anybody that provides oversight other than the board members themselves.
Yeah, I mean, they are the governing body, just
I know,
like Metro
but,
Council, so,
I mean,
I don't know.
yeah.
well, as far as investigative power, I hear them talking about the problems they have with funding the schools, right? But there are other issues that come out from time to time. So I know that Metro puts in a lot of funds schools significantly, and it looks like to me that Metro should have more say in how the money is spent. Okay, for schools. When you fund it, federal government has much stricter requirements on the funding of their dollars than Metro government has on how the dollars are spent. Is that correct?
Yes, Metro's authority is limited.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
We seem to be talking around this here, just to be candid with you here, and we did send our questionnaire to the independent agencies, right? Didn't we send it to NES? And have we got responses from any of them?
you won't. I doubt it. I doubt if
Well,
you
I
get
think
response.
we need to point that out in our report. Because
Well, we didn't get responses
we
from.
we asked them for information we
That's the
received.
final report, the ones we heard from and the ones we.
I think it's just a fact, but see, what we're talking about here in even a bigger scale is the problem with the lack of centralization of this.
Well, that's what we said. That's the theme we've heard over and over and over again,
And
decentralized.
I think the fact that we have, and I mean, I'd name them, NES, Airport Authority, public schools are given an opportunity to tell us what they were doing, and they didn't respond. You know, I think part of it is shining the light on what's going on. And
Well, I think that's part of what we have done, in fact.
And so if we get back to the issue of the Inspector General,
Yeah,
you know, we certainly have the authority to recommend that one be set up.
yes.
We certainly have the prerogative to say that we think, and again, I'm doing this because we don't want to appear like we're tarring
Right.
Metro and everybody else is just great.
Right.
No,
We ought to just be saying that these independent agencies ought to agree to either be subject to oversight by the AG or create their own.
yeah.
I mean, part of it is, you know, yes, we're independent, but maybe it's going to be a good idea for us to start walking down the same road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and because they are all part of the government in the broad sense.
Well, the public would know the distinction.
Yeah.
The public doesn't
The
know
public
that-
would know. I mean, I
that
think
public
most people
schools is
don't
their
know
own
those distinctions.
But see, that's part of what we're going to explain in either number 2,
Probably number 2.
that we have these agencies that are, quote, independent,
Right.
not subject to oversight.
It will say that in an executive order, every executive order says that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say, the other executive orders don't say what you all are talking about, which is we recommend that you
Right.
come under this, and you're welcome to say that.
But see, quite frankly, we're writing this in a way where anyone that wants to read it is going to understand what we're recommending,
Yeah,
including
best
the print and the broadcast media.
Well, that's the idea.
And I'm not sure I would give the option, we recommend that either you come under this or you have your own IG. That strikes me as,
Begging for the other results.
yeah, thank you for that.
Well, then, I don't mind saying that you ought to.
I mean,
It's that should. It's the should.
Should.
It's the should that you
Yeah, I'm
emphasize.
fine with that.
That's good. I think that's good. Anything else on Inspector General that we need to discuss?
I'll make sure you get.
You send that, and we have to talk about maybe, I was hoping we might talk about breaking this into sections and people
So
writing
we
different
just,
portions.
but what we are going to write, what we don't have right now is a general description of duties.
No, and when you send around
I'm gonna send it, I
that,
think that Los Angeles, there.
you send it to me and I'll
get it,
disseminate it
okay.
to the rest of the group. I'm happy to. Everybody got this from me.
I don't remember
I
seeing
know,
that.
I know, I definitely sent it to Bill. I think I did in August, but I'll.
I'll go back and look.
The Los Angeles one?
Yeah.
I can probably find.
Okay.
Will you find it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. The second, we've only been on the first recommendation so far. The second would be how to get existing ordinances and policies and practices maybe either simplified, clarified. I know that some of them are state legislation, Nikki, that are out there, which we can't change. I mean, at least the metropolitan government can't change that. It could, it would take the council, it could change ordinances, and the mayor's office can change executive orders. So, to the extent that's necessary, that's work that somebody could do. That might require some, again, work with the council. It might require the council's, I'm just thinking out loud, it might require the council's staff and attorneys. I'm not sure who does that, or whether, so I'm throwing that out for discussion. How can we clarify all that? What we read had gaps in it.
And I was looking for the precise language here that I was calling to mind, but when we went through
It was in our
2.222,
Yes, that's
and we looked at the definitions of who was covered, the text of the definition covered everybody,
yeah.
but the practice is that it's only applying to employees. And see, that's part of what I was talking about here, is that what I'd like to do is go back through 222 and look at these different definitions, because my relatively uninformed view of what we have now is very broad definitions of who's covered,
Yeah.
and very narrow
Well, aren't there-
interpretations
Nikki,
about
weren't
who's
there-
being
Weren't there
applied.
exceptions that were carved out?
Yeah,
That's sort of
essentially,
yeah.
the standards cover employees, which is broadly defined to include board and commission members.
Right.
And officials, elected officials, and employees. The Board of Ethical Conduct, however, only has jurisdiction over elected officials and members of boards and commission.
Yeah.
And the reason is that under the charter, the Civil Service Commission has oversight over discipline of employees,
Right.
and there are due process rights involved.
Yeah.
So that's why complaints against employees are made to the appointing authority, because that appointing authority then has the power to investigate and determine whether charges are going to be brought against the employee and what discipline to impose on the employee.
Yeah.
Since this board cannot have authority to do that,
Yeah.
to go into personnel matters in terms of hiring or firing, etc. So that's why the board only looks at complaints filed against elected officials and members on boards and commissions, but not employees. who are either civil service employees or employees appointed by different agencies that are subject to the discipline rules of those agencies.
So there's another example of just diffusion of authority. We're not talking about making personnel decisions. We're talking about the authority for some entity to receive a complaint and figure out whether it's meritorious or not. Now, if that's ultimately going to result in an employee being disciplined, well, that's up to the appointing authority. But I think what I'm saying is that I believe that the language of the ordinance is providing broad definitions, but then the actual implementation, at least as far as sanctions, has been narrowed, and I'm just not sure that's a good idea.
It's been left up to the individual department heads.
I mean,
isn't that-
the department heads are the appointing authorities. They have the authority to discipline. We don't want to mess with civil service.
Right.
But we don't want to use the civil service system as a shield against an entity doing an investigation on a charge of conflict of interest.
Now,
Particularly when you have a department head who is potentially investigating his or her own department or someone within it.
Right.
I think that's part of the
Again,
problem.
the way I'd envision it is if I were the Inspector General and I got a complaint that somebody's dealing under the table and I looked into it, I'd have the investigative authority to get the facts. If I find that's the case, then I give that to the supervising authority of that employee and say, here it is. I'm also, by the way, it's criminal conduct. I'm giving it to the district attorney.
Right.
Rather than saying, oh my, I can't touch it because I'm going to give that to the department head.
Right.
Now, that just seems to me to handcuff.
the Inspector General.
Yeah.
Well, is a takeaway from this that there will likely be a need for amending this legislation, the section 2.22, to comply with the Office of the Inspector General?
Well, that's why I have to go
That
back
may
through.
be, and
I'll be happy to
we've all
go
got
back
it.
through and
We've all
look.
got it, but yeah.
figure that out.
That could be the case. So that's what B is going to tell, that's the work that's going to be done on B.
But then again, in lay terms, what we're trying to do is avoid having existing law being interpreted as a shield against appropriate investigations into conflict of interest and
Right.
ethics
I
violations.
think that's right. I think that's right.
Again, we're just
I agree with
supplementing
that,
what's
too.
already here.
Yeah, right.
Could that be like an either-or recommendation? In other words, it's you're going to use the should language. They should choose to come under this.
Well, that's those are the independent entities.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about here is that if you get a complaint,
The Inspector
you're going to
General
investigate
should.
it.
Yeah.
There may be different sanctions that
Right.
need to be meted out.
Right.
If one of those sanctions is discipline, the Inspector General can't discipline the employee, but the Inspector General can hand the report.
Right.
Just like right now, the audit department can conduct an audit and
Give a
hand the
report.
report to the department head and say, look, you got this problem going on here. Heads might roll. But it's not the auditors that are firing anybody.
So they could make that recommendation, and if it, what I'm concerned about is if it requires a change in state law. You know,
No,
we've-
not state law, metro ordinance.
Metro.
No.
It would be a metro
I'm sorry,
ordinance, Mary.
until I
No,
was
it would, 2.22 is the
distracted by
metro
the fire.
ordinance that deals with,
I got it, I'm sorry.
I think, no, not state, I don't think we're going to make recommendations on state law. I don't know how we can.
Well, we've missed the deadline, it's like.
And with, especially with our deadline,
Yeah.
we're not going to make
Well, I mean,
recommendations.
their deadline's over.
Yeah,
for
we're
new
not going to make
Yeah.
that recommendation.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's
Well, and
okay.
I think that brings up the point too with the documents we had to sign. They were so vague in the parties that were defined in the conflict of interest.
The one that we sent around
Yeah.
at Bill's suggestion, which was
Yeah,
very
like I
wise
had to go to an
suggestion.
attorney and be like, what do you think they mean here? And he's like, I don't know. And, you know, he's,
And you work
does
at a
board,
place where you could get a lot of opinions.
the guy that does board governance sits right across from me and I showed him this and he was like, this is not good. It's not well written.
So maybe one of our recommendations
Maybe you
needs to
could
be to
He will.
redraft
Yeah.
the conflict of interest disclosure forms
Ron, you want to do that?
to make it clearer.
Yeah, I'll have him
Yeah.
look at it and help make recommendations, and we'll bring it to you all.
Maybe that could be an addendum to your
Could.
a sample
It could. It could.
form.
If there is a question on intent, who would we ask that question of?
The intent of the ordinance?
The intent of the question in the conflict of interest policy?
Is it the one that's attached to the ordinance?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the one
It's part of the standards of conduct, the
Right.
disclosure form. Well, you can ask legal. We can look at it.
Ask Nikki, yeah.
But,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to see whether we can offer any additional construction of it.
But if there's, I think that's a very concrete thing, Rhonda suggests, that I didn't think about that,
Yeah.
to be honest, and that's certainly very concrete. And
Might be helpful to know the last time it was revised.
do you know that, Nikki, when that form was revised? Or was it part of that executive order that,
If you're
think it
talking
was-
about the one attached to the ordinance,
That would be, yeah.
oh, attachment B, that's to executive order?
that I think is to the executive order,
That's the
Bill.
executive order.
Yeah.
We just have down there, we have N0039.013.1, I don't know what that drafting
I
date
think
is.
it was an attachment to Mayor Barry's executive order.
So that's, attachment B, okay, annual disclosure. That's part of the executive order. I think, it's similar to what's in the, standards of conduct in the ordinance. But it was just drafted, I think it's attached to the executive order, which,
February 16.
yeah. So the, yeah, 2016. It may have been in existence before then because the executive orders tend to be similar on the same topic. But it,
Refreshed.
yeah, so it can,
Refresh it.
yeah, it can definitely be updated based on your recommendations.
That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we could do an executive order that rescinds that
Or
portion.
replaces that portion,
Yeah.
yeah. Third recommendation, really ethics and conflict of interest training and certification that training has been provided. That I think we've been kind of discussing throughout. Is there any discussion about that? Is that an appropriate recommendation? Does everyone agree? And,
Absolutely.
discussion on that one? That one may be a little bit less controversial, not controversial, but require less discussion. The next one, the fourth one, D, has to do with the Metropolitan Auditor, and I know speaking for myself, I was impressed with those folks, impressed with what they do and their staff, and their professionalism, and I think struck, as several of us were, by the limitations that they operate under, particularly budget and staff, and with the importance of what they're charged with. So I think as we heard that, I think that was one of the things that I think we wanted to say in this report is it would be a good thing for metropolitan government if we could provide additional resources there. I had down about how the office reports, and that was really a note I think I had made at some point about to whom the Metro Auditor should report. And the idea of that would be that maybe the follow-up, that currently the auditor would do a report or recommendations to departments, and there might or might not be follow-up on those recommendations. And the auditor's office has so little resource to go and do follow-up work that if there's an additional line of reporting there, that might lead to better follow-up on whatever they do come up with. Is that sensible to everyone?
Who do they report to right now? Finance, okay.
And there's the, under the charter, there's the independent audit committee.
There is a committee.
Yeah, and that's who hires
That's who hires the auditors.
the auditor and,
They spoke of that when they were here before.
Yeah.
So what can you add to that, Nikki? Is my suggestion here not one that's easily implemented or
I mean, the suggestion of,
reporting to the COO as opposed to,
what,
or it could be in addition to. It could be in addition to whatever they currently do.
yeah, because since it's created by the charter,
Yeah.
and the charter already has who oversees them, who is the audit committee.
Yeah, I
That's,
see what you're saying. That's good. That's helpful.
It includes the vice mayor, the director of finance, and then 2 members of the Metro Council, and then a member of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, and let's see, Tennessee Society of Certified Public Accountants. So it's made up of all these
already a
people,
body, yes,
that
yes.
oversees their
Yes. Maybe this could be an additional line of reporting.
But does the ordinance or the charter say that they can't provide it to anybody else?
Oh, you mean that
The
no one
the
else can
reports.
oversee them?
Their
Oh,
reports.
no, their public reports are public.
Maybe just, I think
Yeah,
what
they can
we're
be-
simply
they're
saying is
provided.
an additional line of reporting so that there can be better follow-up. That really is part, and so not to replace what's there.
Okay.
Not to replace what's there. Just an additional, trying to make it more, have greater follow-up on what they find and what they recommend.
Well, then why don't they give it to the inspector general too?
That would be appropriate, wouldn't it?
And again, these are public, they're not confidential
Yeah,
documents,
these are
so.
public.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's public
Documents.
anyway, and so why not have it be, go to all those places?
A question, if we pictured an inspector general conducting an investigation, and somebody requested documents in the midst of that investigation, is there a way we could protect those documents until the investigation is concluded, like you can with other agency investigations?
Yeah, because it's not really law enforcement per se. They're, and then there's the confidentiality under state law that applies to the audit committee and their work.
Yeah.
So this entity is going to be a little different. So its work product may not be confidential.
Right, I just think we ought to think about in our recommendations,
that.
how to protect an ongoing investigation while it is ongoing until its conclusion.
Well, I think what we ought to we could make the general recommendation that the work papers of the Inspector General's office, consistent with the public records law, should remain confidential.
And we can research whether there's a way it can be created under state law that will afford confidentiality.
I mean, the executive branch agencies all have some protection on work papers and things like that, which I imagine we can adopt. That's a good point.
Yeah.
The next one is, that came up in other various meetings, was the whistleblower policy, and I think part of that is just awareness of it. It's hardly used as it exists now. And so that's, I guess, part of the training. These things dovetail with each other, I would think.
It's training to employees, but also
Public, too.
We want the public to use it as
Public.
well.
We do. We want to be available to the public. And it is, as it's currently,
Right.
as it currently exists, but nobody knows.
Yeah.
Right. So we had various discussions about different things here, whether the whistleblower policy that exists now provides adequate protection for whistleblowers, whether whistleblowing should be required, like it is for lawyers. And I think we had that general discussion. You know, we know lawyers are supposed to do that under our ethical requirements. I don't know whether we do that for folks here. This is directed not just at Metro employees, but also the public. You can't, I don't think you can require the public to do that.
No, we can certainly require employees.
It could be
to do that.
encouraged. And we could require employees if we thought that was appropriate.
I think the public's not gonna need encouragement.
No, well, it'll be available to them. I mean, if they're more aware of it.
And the context we talked about requiring employees was to give employees cover,
That's right. For
Yep.
where they say,
saying
I'm
we're
obli-"
supposed to do it.
That's like
It's part of the anti-retaliation.
Well, and also, I mean, just speaking from very limited personal experience, is I raise that probably 2 or 3 times a week
Yeah,
in different, like, I'm offered things,
yeah.
and I always say no, and I am almost uniformly looked at like I have a third eye. It's just like not, people have never heard that before. I can't accept that, I can't.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I look like the total square I am. So, but I don't mind, but it is interesting that that's not the norm. I think it's difficult for people to say no sometimes. So if it's
So
expected that you have to say no,
Or if
then there's.
expected that you have to, I think what we're talking about is it's not only expected that you say no, but it's expected that you report it if you see it.
Exactly.
And that becomes the expectation, so that when you do report something, you're doing what you've been told to do,
And see,
in
and
essence.
a great national example of that's Lieutenant Colonel Vindman.
Yes.
Because if you note, even though the president's unhappy with him and sent him back to the Pentagon,
Yes.
the Secretary of Defense immediately announced that he did exactly what we trained him to do.
Yeah.
Right.
And he is welcome back, and
Which helps.
so I think it provides a layer of protection if employees have the obligation to report.
Sounds-
Now, that doesn't mean they're going to report everything.
No,
We
it
know
never means that. It never means that.
But it provides a safeguard.
Yeah. So beefing that up in various ways, that'll be something that'll need to be fleshed out a little bit in the report, I would think. But we've already really talked about F, I think, as it came up under when we defined Inspector General and their authority, but I think we've kind of worked out what F would be, which would be should, that they should adopt similar requirements. And so.
Should if they have already done so, but we don't know if they ever done.
We don't know if they have or not, because they didn't answer. I'm less clear in my notes what we say about procurement. You know, it obviously is a department that has it has legislation that affects it. It has, it's complex topic. It clearly is responsible. I mean, maybe we don't mention it separately. I'm not sure how we handle it. I know it's something we've discussed a lot, and we heard from procurement. So I just said discuss, because I'm not sure,
Well, I think.
I'm
one
not
thing
as sure what we say.
We've got to make sure that procurement and the IG don't step on each other, and
Yes.
that we don't create a backdoor bid protest process through the IG that would supplant the already
existing
and
procedures that are
very
there.
narrow and difficult to use bid protest process. I mean, so
Right.
we don't want to give people a second bite at the apple kind of thing with that. So I think it's worth considering how these things will
How
work
they
together.
relate to each other.
Well, I think, well, I agree that we don't want to give them a backdoor unless it's fraud,
Yeah.
okay?
Unless it's something that's fraud that the IG
Right.
would need to inspect.
Or special preference. Those are violations that can be easily documented, because there's supposed to be a mechanism in place within procurement to ensure that all the policies and practices, the BAO is set up to ensure that all the policies and practices are adhered to. My concern is the BAO reports to the purchasing director. Okay, so to me, that's a conflict of interest. So, as part of NAACP, we have made recommendations that be a separate organization within finance and not reporting directly to the procurement manager. But I think they provide, they have dual duties. So I think they have part responsibility BAO and part responsibility procurement. But to me, that organization, which is supposed to be the checks and balance on the procurement process, right, to make sure that the policy, practices, and fairness take place, is in line with the director of procurement. To me, that's not the right place for that organization to be. Just my take.
But our discussion last time was that if an inspector general received a complaint
They could act on it.
about an ongoing procurement, the inspector general's response would be, there is a process that you have to follow.
Right.
So our notion was the inspector general would not do what you say. The inspector general would say, this is an ongoing procurement matter. I'm not getting involved. I refer you to the procuring agency. It seems that what we could say here would be that in addition to any general conflict of interest ethical rules, that we would recommend that the procurement office consider whether it should adopt additional rules that are particularly suited for what they do.
They've got those national guidelines.
Well, I was very impressed. I mean,
That was
they all
impressive.
were looking for some help.
They were good witnesses is probably the wrong word, but they gave us really good information and really candid information, I thought.
Yeah.
Well, and the problem with, one of the problems with procurement is if you have a small company that is aggrieved by a procurement decision, maybe doing a bid protest at the initial step, which I think is before like the same committee that selected them or something, maybe that's doable, but beyond that, you've got to go to court, and that becomes incredibly expensive.
And most people aren't going to do it.
Most people aren't going to do it, and I think the standard of review is, I don't think it's de novo, I'm not sure, but
I've never done one.
it's,
so.
is it?
No, because it usually a writ of certiorari. So if the agency acted illegally, fraudulently, arbitrarily, capriciously, and so the initial step is the protest to the purchasing agent, and then after that, the procurement appeals board.
That's right,
Yeah.
okay.
And you don't have to have a lawyer to do that, I
No,
presume.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
But the purchasing
don't
agent
have
is the
to.
one that made the decision to begin with.
Yeah, for them to kind of look at whatever the complaint is about what was done you allege was done inappropriately with this procurement. After they look at it, they issue a decision. And then you appeal that to the procurement appeals board. And the appeals board looks at it de novo to determine whether this procurement was conducted in accordance with applicable law. And then after they make their decision, if
If you're still aggrieved, you can take it to Chancery Court. Yeah.
Yeah, and we agreed we didn't want to touch that, but I think there is still aspects of procurement decisions that are not going to, that are fraudulent, that don't show up as pure investigation.
Well, which could happen in any department, but if
Right.
that did happen in procurement,
Right.
that would be something I would think somebody would take to the inspector
Yeah,
general.
there's
Right.
a state
I would think.
controller, and then and then the auditing, the fraud reporting to the auditing
It could be
auditor's
something, as
office.
could happen in any department,
Yeah.
I
Right.
presume.
Right. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to get. I don't
Yeah.
want to bypass this practice that
Right,
you
right,
agreed.
right.
But I think there may be situations that can be reviewed to determine whether or not this goes beyond
Yeah, if it goes beyond
the normal,
ordinary.
that you didn't respond in a timely fashion or you didn't have a legitimate case. If you miss your 2-week window, your 3-week window, I don't want you to have to use that process as a way to address it. But if there is issues of awards without competition, if there's issues of discussion with people in order to determine preferences. Okay, all of that should be challenged. Okay.
Those are challenged before the procurement, because the Procurement Appeals Board looks at all alleged irregularities or whatever is alleged is appropriate with that whole procurement process, that it was done illegally, not in accordance with law, that the appropriate procedures were not followed.
Okay, well, maybe what we need to do is make sure that that process is clearly understood, because I know there's a
Yes.
2 weeks response back to the procurement officer, and then there's the bid board, and I think all that has to be done within 30 days of the award, right?
There's a time limit to
So I
to
guess-
appeal to the to do a protest
Right.
once you know of facts.
Right.
Or you should know of facts.
Right.
And then after that, the decision of the purchasing agent, then you have a set amount of time to appeal to the Procurement Appeals Board.
Right.
And then the board sets a hearing, based on the schedules of the persons involved.
Well, let me ask one question that I never did get answered. Once a award is made, does all parties that submitted bid notified
Yes. So when
in writing?
yes, usually they release an email once a decision has been made. All the entities that submitted a response are notified that an award has been made, and this is who the award was made to.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about subcontractors that are participating, that are acting to serve as subcontractors for a prime?
I can't speak to that. I mean, the people actually responding are the primes. So those are the direct contacts that are notified that there has been an award made on the solicitation that you participated in. And if the winner has subcontractors involved, there's another process they go through where there are documents that have to be signed, where certain acknowledgments have to be made by the prime and the subcontractor, etc. But that's for the winner.
Let me suggest,
Okay.
we might want to consider under gaps in number 4,
Yeah,
if we want to add a general statement that there needs to be a clear understanding of the process of awarding contracts and protesting awards.
Yeah.
That may not be widely understood, so it needs to be more clearly and consistently explained.
Well, that could be easily included in the notice.
Yeah, I will check. But I'm almost sure that the notice actually states you have so many days to
Well,
protest.
I mean, that should be
Yeah.
a mandatory part of the response.
But see, my second recommendation, that's why I made it first, was that to the extent that there are practices particularly relating to procurement, that ought to be re-examined in light of this emphasis on conflict of interest and ethics, that we would just recommend that the procurement people go back and look at that to see whether additional.
yeah.
And that
Work
reminds
is
me of
needed.
another concept that we brought up in the audit, was that they need to look at these high-risk departments more
Transaction.
frequently.
Yes.
Because remember, procurement, I found, had been audited like once in 10 years, and they should be audited probably more frequently than
At
that.
least every 2 years.
Yeah.
If the audit's budget and staff are increased,
Yeah.
they will be able to, identifying the high-risk departments that could include procurement. Yeah, let me make a note.
Yeah.
If I bid on a contract, I'm not the bidder that's getting awarded the contract. I get a letter that says that and says my 10 days. At what point would I get the documentation, the score sheets that would show me how I fared or how I was ranked compared to the other firms that submitted bids? Do I have to ask for that?
Yes.
Yeah, I have to check, but basically everything is public once the notice of intent to award is issued. All the documents pertaining to the procurement become public. So anyone can request. Usually what happens is the ones that did not win will ask, oh, I want to see the proposals that this person, because many of those documents are quite voluminous, so they can request any of the documents, the proposals that were submitted by the winning party or by any other party, and the score sheets, all that.
Are those
Yeah.
online, or would they have to actually come here and get them?
I'm not aware that they're online. I think they don't have to actually, it can be done electronically. They just email the purchasing agent or procurement and ask, and usually it's because most of all that stuff is electronic. They just email it to them, a zip file, etc.
Yeah, but typically you do, in the past, you have to request it through Freedom of Information Act.
Just open, just really informal. You just send an email, just say, I would like a copy of all bids submitted, proposals submitted, and the scoring, and it will be provided.
Good, well, I think we'll
So how
incorporate
do-
that.
how
We'll
do-
incorporate that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
The last thing on my list, also from notes, is whether we want to just say that we would be available at some future time, I said a year, to reconvene and if the mayor wants us to, and respond to whatever the mayor's office has identified as additional questions or things that we could look into further. Is everybody willing to include that as, thank you. Thank
2 years.
Thank you. You know, it's easy to say yes to something a year from now. So,
Easy to say two.
and at a future date, I mean, yeah. So we will include that. So are there folks who want to volunteer to write particular sections? Is the structure acceptable to people for the report? Is this an outline that I've made a lot of notes on my outline now for things that need to be tweaked, but is the structure of this report, are we headed in the right direction? Are folks comfortable with the way it's organized?
Yeah.
Good. Any volunteers to do any portions of this? I'm happy to.
More of like just the factual
That
backgroundy
would be
kind of
very
stuff, and leave the legalese kind of things
to the many lawyers.
to
who
the
are
many
here.
of you around the table.
Well, Nikki, would you be available to review the portions of that we write?
Definitely, and
as a
I'll be
draft?
happy to.
you-
Sure.
Would you do the background on existing authorities?
Sure, I'll provide a kind of a bullet point of all the.
And that would really go under number 2 of the outline? I mean, you
Yeah.
provided it to me at the very
Sure,
beginning.
but I'll have the written.
You have that.
Yeah.
You've already almost written it.
Sure, I'll do
You've
that.
almost already written it, so that would be extraordinarily helpful.
And I was pretty close to the survey, so I will volunteer to work
So
with
that's
Audra
1
on that.
and 3 then.
Yeah.
Really 1 and 3, and I'm happy to work on. I don't think the gaps are that difficult to describe, but on these recommendations, I'm happy to take a stab at the Inspector General. Knowing that it will be something that everyone looks at closely, because I know that's probably our most detailed topic. Bill, would you look at 2.22?
Whatever you want me to do.
That's B.
Yep.
That's B. C, training. Alex, is that something you would want to sort of describe? Or, I mean, people can volunteer for portions of
Yeah.
this if they want to.
Which one is, you said, which
C
C?
is on the second page, is
No, I
about the.
can,
Can
I've
you
already got
do-
it done, because I just did it the
You've
other
done,
day.
oh, never
Okay.
mind, then Mary's done that. Mary's done that. And I will be glad to be the synthesizer of all this and try to make it consistent and stylistically hang together. I'll be glad to do that. And I'll volunteer on the Inspector General portion.
And I'll be happy to work.
Perhaps the rest of this, yeah.
With anybody that takes any part of it. I mean,
Well, you'll,
I have limited time.
yeah.
Because I care for my
Yes,
mother, but
yes.
I can get on for a couple of hours on conference calls at different times.
Well, we meet again on the 10th, so that's very helpful. And I
I'm
think,
happy to write up after the part where we're saying that the independent
Oh, thank
parts
you.
of the government should,
thank you, thank
and we
you.
don't know what they're doing now. I'm happy to write that.
That would be very
Happy to do
helpful.
E.
Thank you, Martha. And I think with that division of labor, we should be able to, and I am not envisioning a, 50-page report, nor do I think it would be helpful to have a 50-page report.
They're typically like 2 or 3 pages.
I think we need to try to synthesize it as much as possible. If we have, if this has brought us hopefully into focus about what we want to say, for the most part, I think it can be a short. I don't know if it can be 2 or 3. We'll try to make it less than 5.
Well, I mean, I guess the survey's gonna be 1 page, right?
It might.
The survey results, is that gonna be appended?
The survey will be appended.
Yeah, be
Agree
appended.
with that. We will
Okay.
append the survey.
All right.
We will append the survey, but we will describe the salient findings
Yeah.
of the survey.
Right.
So
And
only
then
like
the-
500 pages with exhibits.
No, and
No,
then,
it's not going to be that.
and then
You know.
the other documents, right? The other documents, which are
The legal
the
background.
legals are part of the appendix as well.
Yeah, most of there can be a
An electronic,
link,
yeah,
a
an
website
electronic
link.
appendix.
Because most of them are on the websites, like the.
That's what you did for me, I think, Nikki, at the very beginning. Didn't you send me an email that had,
Yes,
and I
have
printed
an
them for the
atta-
group, I think.
Yeah, I
But-
had an attachment, but I can have a link that has where the
We can be
the
links
Metro
to those.
Code,
Yep,
the procurement regulations, and the standards of conduct.
Perfect.
All those links where they
if
can
you
be
can
found.
give us that in a format we can plug in,
Yeah.
that would be
Sure.
extremely helpful, extremely helpful.
Um,
Mary?
well, I'm going to send you the executive order I just did, that it
Okay.
hasn't been signed yet, but it's, the format is,
On how to.
it's just been vetted by legal, it's like
Right.
totally ready to go. And then we
That'll
could
be
drop
great.
in the
And I'll
relevant paragraphs.
try to put in everything and make it consistent,
Okay.
yeah. Anything else today? We try to do it within 2 hours, and we will have succeeded if, unless we have other business. I don't want to rush anybody. Any other business today? All right.
Let me get your email.
Shall we adjourn? Yeah, I'll write it down.
Good work.
Thank you all so much. We're adjourned. We're adjourned. I really appreciate it.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.